Hello, my name is Dave Emery, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 733, titled Wikileaks Soup, ROVEing Reporter, subtitled A Night in Tunisia. This program is being recorded on January 16th of the year 2011. This program is going to wrap up, I hope, the series of broadcasts or a sequence of broadcasts that I have been doing about Wikileaks. I want to stress that this is a remarkable phenomenon. It is not, repeat, this is not a good thing. It's remarkable to me to see people from, sort of mainstream, quote, progressive icons, such as Daniel Ellsberg and Michael Moore and others, flocking unqualifiedly to the feet of Julian Assange and elevating him to the position of a political martyr. The anonymous milieu, who's, of course, they're anonymous, so there may well be some hardcore Nazis and fascists in there. But on the balance, it would appear to be anything but. My guess is most of the political and ideological orientation of those individuals would be sort of described as anarcho-utopian, to coin a term. If we just remove all of the limits and barriers to human understanding and freedom, then humanity will blossom anew or afresh or something. That, in my opinion, is not the case. But the irony is that at the core of WikiLeaks appears to be anything but what Michael Moore or Daniel Ellsberg or the anonymous people or anything else would like. First of all, at the core of the pirate vortex, as I called it, not only anonymous, but Pirate Bay, the associated pirate parties and various elements, is not only a prominent Nazi financier, Carl Lundstrom, who appears to be part of the what I call the underground Reich, the Nazi International, and the old Bormann Capital Network, or the capital network that evolved from the old Bormann Flight Capital program. And at the core of that, as well as the Pirate Bay people, Pirate Bay being a file-sharing site in which files are pirated somewhat. And at the core of that, and again, the people using Pirate Bay would see themselves as anti-corporate and anti-profit, so to speak. And yet at the very core of that appears to be some corporate entities that are looking to use the BitTorrent protocol or platform as a corporate vehicle for making a whole lot of money off of file sharing in the future. And indeed, Pirate Bay itself, in addition to its Nazi/financier connections, is housed within an offshore corporate entity called Reservella, which is very, very mysterious indeed, and incorporated in the Seychelles Islands. The part of the title of this ROVEing Reporter is a reference to Karl Rove. That's right, Karl Rove, Bush's right-hand man. And he is very much into the Swedish political mix, and there are indications that he is involved with the WikiLeaks situation. My feeling is that the articles that have mentioned this and the blog posts that have mentioned this have missed some of the logical implications of this. However, Karl Rove's presence in Sweden at this time is more than a little interesting. Along the lines of what we were talking about last week, and in addition, of course, to the presence of Carl Lundstrom at the apex of what I call the pirate vortex, or pirate milieu, we find that WikiLeaks' Scandinavian operations are basically under the supervision of a guy named Göran Jermas, a.k.a. Israel Shamir, who was part and parcel to a Swedish Nazi and anti-Semitic milieu. Furthermore, his son, a fellow named Wallström, is part and parcel to that same kind of ideological orientation, and he has been in charge of WikiLeaks cable operations in Russia. As I noted last week, that has to be one of two situations. Either the link between Carl Lundstrom, who patronizes the Nordic Publishers House, and people of the Swedish Nazi/anti-Semitic milieu like Göran Jermas, a.k.a. Israel Shamir and son, who also are part of a political environment that overlaps the Nordic House milieu. Either that's a coincidence or there is a relationship between those two. I don't think that that is a coincidence. And as we cruise further into the WikiLeaks environment, as we begin to stir up and sample the WikiLeaks soup, so to speak, and see just what exactly are the ingredients that have gone into this soup. We're going to be taking a look at the fact that, obviously, as we've seen in For the Record 725, there are intelligence services involved here. Last week, in For the Record 732, I described WikiLeaks as sort of the intelligence services equivalent of a WWF cage match. There are a lot of intelligence services that appear to be involved in this. My feeling is this is a highly complex event. I still have a lot of questions about it. I think that the analyses that have been offered up are simplistic and inadequate, although many of them are at least partially accurate. I'm going to attempt, note my choice of words, I'm going to attempt to briefly do justice to some of those arguments and address those. In particular, the notion that WikiLeaks is an Obama administration clandestine operation in order to clamp down on internet freedom and cyber security. Cybersecurity is certainly a priority of the Obama administration, but I think the available evidence points to rather the Bush-Rove GOP/underground Reich-linked element of our State Department and intelligence services, rather than those linked with the Democrats and Obama. But again, this is highly complex. It's an event hitherto unprecedented, and I want to strongly caution people against simplistic analyses, because indeed WikiLeaks soup is not a bad metaphor. This is a goulash of sorts. There are all kinds of ingredients in this. And so we're going to stir this up, and we're going to do a little tasting, and we're going to see just what exactly is in here. One of the things that I noted last week is that one of the aspects of high tech that would be desirable to a fascist or past a point any other type of totalitarian, in addition to, for example, using the BitTorrent protocol to make a whole lot of money for a corporate element, as it appears that Lundstrom and company are doing. Lundstrom wanted to move Pirate Bay to Argentina. Nazi financiers certainly would have been more comfortable with operations based there, I think. I also noted that with the advent of high technology, with computers being so important to our world, and with so many sensitive and potentially deadly things involved with computers, such as utility networks, nuclear power plants, and various things, the ability of a relatively small number, of people who could use that technology to dominate or even end the lives of a great many other people is a very real option vis-a-vis high tech. It's a possibility. You gain control of the right high tech, and man, you can absolutely screw people or dominate them or just make life completely miserable for vast numbers of people, and it doesn't take many to do that. So, noting high tech's capabilities for the imposition of will upon other unwilling human beings, that's something to bear in mind. I also, in terms of the psychosocial implications of fascism, fascism, of course, in its root definition is corporatism, or the corporate state, as Mussolini called it. But at a psychosocial level, fascism is derived from the Roman word fascis. That is people may have seen the old Mercury head dimes. That is a symbol of the Roman Republic in which a bundle of sticks is bound together with an axe head. The image is meant to suggest that although one rod in that fascis is not particularly strong, when bound together, they become very, very strong indeed, and with that axe head could be quite formidable, a weapon. In the book, A Mosque in Munich, someone described Saeed Ramadan of the Muslim Brotherhood as a fascist and said that he gains political power by gathering others around him. At a psychosocial level, fascism could be thought of as bundle think, as group think. Indeed, the word fascism has the same Latin derivation as the word fascinate. Think about a rock concert or a political rally or a sporting event where people are chanting in unison or waving their arms in the air in unison. That sort of bundle think, that loss of the individual ego and personality into the dissolution of the individual ego and personality, at least temporarily, into this larger group entity permits not only the exercise of a type of group will, which can be very destructive, but it also absolves the individual of responsibility. For example, a person goes to a sporting event who might never under normal circumstances go running through the street and throwing rocks through windows or turning over or setting fire to cars. But after a championship football or basketball game, we have often seen the spectacle of perhaps inebriated sports fans rioting and doing things that they normally would not do. That's an example of bundlethink and how intoxicating it can be, particularly if you happen to combine that with chemical intoxicants. I see in much of the response to Wikileaks and some of the very clumsy whack-a-mole techniques that, frankly, the U.S. has used to try to neutralize Assange, I see in the hacking attacks that have taken, the denial of service attacks that have taken place against PayPal and some of the other corporations that had allowed themselves to be used as financial conduits for WikiLeaks, something of that dangerous bundle-think mentality, rather like Madame Defarge knitting and cheering on the guillotine, or the folks that ran the guillotine during the terror that followed the French Revolution. I think there is potentially a dangerous groupthink or bundle-think element to the anonymous / Operation Payback response. And what's ironic, too, is that a pretty good bet would be that, again, and I want to make this point again, lest I be misunderstood, is characterizing the pirate folks or the anonymous folks as fascists, that in fact their ideological orientation would be, if anything, opposite, anarcho-utopian, and yet they have wound up working for a Nazi milieu. And as we'll see, along with the people who have supported WikiLeaks, such as Michael Moore and Daniel Ellsberg and the other icons of the progressive sector, they've not only been working for a Nazi milieu, but for Karl Rove. It reminds me, I think the guy's name was Karl Kraus, a Viennese playwright who observed very sagely that the problem with the human race, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, is that they can't tell an urn from a chamber pot. Yes, indeedy. But noting the bundle-think sort of street riot aspect to Operation Payback, and how in certain respects it could be thought of as bundle-think and something very much akin to psychosocial fascism. The following from the New York Times of Friday, December 10th of 2010, has a good discussion of this. Article by Noam Cohn, headlined, "Hackers Find a Rallying Cry in WikiLeaks," and it reads in part as follows. They got their start years ago as cyber pranksters, an online community of tech-savvy kids more interested in making mischief than political statements. But Thursday's coordinated attacks on major corporate and government websites in defense of WikiLeaks suggested that the loosely organized group called Anonymous might have come of age, evolving into one focused on more serious matters, in this case, their definition of Internet freedom. While the attacks on such behemoths as MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal were not nearly as sophisticated as some less publicized assaults, they were a step forward in the group's larger battle against what it sees as increasing control of the Internet by corporations and governments. This week, they found a cause and an icon. Julian Assange, the former hacker who founded WikiLeaks and is now in a London jail at the request of the Swedish authorities investigating him on accusations of rape. This is kind of the shot heard round the world. This is Lexington, said John Perry Barlow, a co-founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a civil libertarian organization that advocates for a freer Internet. Maybe this is Lexington, or maybe it is more like the Reichstag fire in terms of its ultimate implications. I will state that, again, although I have many questions about WikiLeaks still, WikiLeaks soup is a complicated phenomenon. I will state without qualification that no good will come from this, that everything that comes from WikiLeaks will be bad, although at least one potentially short-term good thing may have arisen. We're going to be talking about the Tunisian Revolution recently. Again, hence the subtitle, The Night in Tunisia. It remains to be seen what comes of that. Certainly the old government doesn't appear to have been anything but repressive. Curiously enough, the old government was getting kind of cozy with China, but not anymore, maybe. We'll see. But more thoughts about the cyber war in which WikiLeaks and Anonymous and so forth have been engaging. This is an article from the San Francisco Chronicle of Saturday, December 11th of 2010 by Casey Newton, titled Wikileaks, Cyber War Harm Minor, Threat Isn't. And skipping down in this article, if the activist success was limited this week, denial of service attacks still pose a risk, said Danny McPherson, a vice president of network security research at Mountain View's VeriSign. As attackers flood servers, they can bring down entire parts of a company's network, including its ability to communicate with police or fire departments in emergencies, he said. And the nature of the attack is asymmetrical, McPherson said. A single person with the help of several thousand networked computers at his disposal can do significant damage to a company's infrastructure. I don't think people fully grasp that these are real crimes, he said. The collateral damage can be extreme to the point of taking human life, and that's not an exaggeration. What's more, the software used by activists to commandeer large networks of infected computers into botnets and use them in attacks continues to improve, Leibovitz said. The tools are open source, allowing them to evolve quickly. I don't think we're quite at the level of a cyber war, he said, but what we do see is that some of the capabilities are advancing very quickly. The quality of the tools is improving, and people are learning, unquote. Well, they may be learning how to do the attacks, but look who it turns out Anonymous was really working for, or really who was controlling them. People like Carl Lundstrom, people like Joran Jermos, a.k.a. Israel Shamir. And we're going to take a look at some of the other elements that figure into WikiLeaks. Again, we're going to be sampling the WikiLeaks soup, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the other Nazi and fascist elements that are almost certainly present in this particular mix, I guess one could say. Before we once again begin to explore some of the Nazi connections to the WikiLeaks milieu and some very curious things that they have leaked. For example, there was a cable leaked which would appear to exonerate some Nazi and fascist elements that were allegedly plotting to take the life of Bolivian President Evo Morales. We're going to examine that. That's something about which I have more questions than answers. A very curious leak attributed to WikiLeaks alleges that the U.S. is engaged in a war with flying saucers based near Antarctica, which plays very nicely into some of the Nazi-themed propaganda that has been generated in the underground Nazi milieu since the end of World War II. More about that, however, later. In connection with WikiLeaks, one of the things that should be noted is that not only, again, as we talked about last week, there is a vast amount of information that has been leaked to them. Not even WikiLeaks, if one can believe Julian Assange, is fully aware of just all of the stuff that they've had leaked to them, but it has all been going through the servers, the PRQ servers provided by Rix Telecom and Carl Lundstrom and the Pirate Bay milieu, and my Silicon Valley sources, which that's where I'm based, and they're pretty darn good, are absolutely adamant that if the Nazi International, if Lundstrom's milieu so desired, and one can assume that they would, that arrangement would have permitted them to monitor and download anything that was in the possession of WikiLeaks. In other words, a huge Nazi data mining operation at the core of the pirate vortex or pirate milieu, which in turn is inextricably linked with WikiLeaks, as we saw last week. It would be difficult to exaggerate the links of Pirate Bay, the associated pirate parties, companies owned by people like Peter Sund and others, they are central to the WikiLeaks operation. Among the things that WikiLeaks has leaked, of course, as we noted in the very, very first of our programs about WikiLeaks, for the record 724, they leaked the Social Security numbers of active-duty American military personnel. There is absolutely no conceivable altruistic good motive for doing that. First of all, it stinks to put anybody's Social Security number online. There's no altruistic motivation for doing that. You're just basically victimizing somebody. And putting active duty military personnel's social security numbers could permit the successful infiltration of the military and the accessing and use of WMDs for terrorist purposes. In the Nazi tract, The Serpent's Walk, that I've spoken about so many times in the past, the United States is taken over after a series of terrorist incidents using weapons of mass destruction that are brought into the country through the controlled drug networks. It was a Freudian slip there. And in turn, the United States, after these terrorist incidents lead to the declaration of martial law, the military, which has been infiltrated by the descendants of the SS and the Underground Reich, takes over. And the publishing of the Social Security numbers of active duty military personnel would be greatly useful to terrorists, greatly useful to the realization of a Serpent's Walk scenario, and there is no conceivable positive justification or altruistic justification for doing that. By the very same token, as we're going to examine in an op-ed piece I'm about to read, Wikileaks released information permitting a combatant to circumvent the military's technology for neutralizing improvised explosive devices. Again, the only conceivable motive for doing that is to kill GIs. There is no conceivable altruistic motive for doing that, and it is a safe bet that American military personnel will lose their lives because of it. By the same token, WikiLeaks published a document indicating a number of facilities around the world that the U.S. considered to be absolutely essential to its security, and which many journalistic outlets would not publish because they felt it would be of great use to terrorists. This, again, is something to which there could be no positive or altruistic motive. This is not journalism. This is basically fifth column activity. And it has a very obvious and potentially devastating application to the world of terrorism and counterterrorism. And again, there is no positive journalistic reason for doing this. And Assange, again, this is a very complex situation. Assange appears to be basically a mind control job. I think that the evidence points strongly in the direction of his being a part of the Anne Hamilton burn cult, his denials to the contrary notwithstanding. There are a lot of complicated things with Assange, but whatever else he is certainly an enemy of the United States, and I think that he is himself a tool. I doubt very seriously he is fully cognizant of all of the forces that are manipulating him. To a large extent, my feelings about WikiLeaks were in an op-ed piece that was carried in a publication put out by MIT. This is a Keith Yost op-ed piece called "The Nihilism of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange Compromises U.S. Security." And it's from December 3rd of the year 2010. I'm going to read it in part. In a recent interview with The New Yorker, Julian Assange, the director of WikiLeaks, was asked if he would ever refrain from releasing information he knew might get someone killed. The question was not just hypothetical. A year and a half earlier, Assange had published a study that detailed technical vulnerabilities in actively employed U.S. Army countermeasures against improvised explosive devices. There was no conceivable benefit to publishing the information. The Army needed no extra pressure to address the vulnerabilities. It was already desperately searching for new countermeasures to protect its soldiers. The only beneficiaries were insurgents who, using Assange's gift, could better murder U.S. servicemen. In response to the interview question, Assange was blasé. Yes, he admitted there might be some, quote, blood on our hands, unquote, some, quote, collateral damage, if you will, unquote. But unlike the journalistic world at large, he didn't feel it was his duty to weigh and pass judgment on the value of the information he made public. Transparency, the WikiLeaks founder obstinately insisted, would create a better society for all, and we must be willing to break a few eggs to make the omelet. As he hides behind this reasoning, Assange has released the Social Security numbers of U.S. military personnel, opening them up to identity theft. He has revealed the names of Afghan civilians who collaborate with U.S. forces, a move that was greeted with joy by Taliban commanders who quickly promised to hunt down and execute those named. He has betrayed the identities of human rights activists and journalists who at great risk to themselves passed information on their conditions to U.S. diplomats. In discussing one source, a diplomat pleads, please protect, and for good reason. With the informant's identity now known, there is a serious risk that this poor woman who trusted the United States will be whisked off to prison, or worse. And again, among the things that was made public was a list of facilities that the U.S. thinks is absolutely essential to its security, and so that the publication of which is going to be devastating, potentially, to the United States. And skipping down into this particular editorial, I think my own personal feelings about this, and they're more complex than this, but my own feelings could be pretty much summed up in what this fellow has to say about the organization. The greatest irony is that by proving transparency can be used for evil as well as good, Assange hasn't just harmed our national security, he's poisoned the very movement he purports to lead. After 9/11, we worked hard to tear down the walls between agencies and encourage a free flow of information that would better help us connect the dots on issues such as terrorism. It is likely that in the aftermath of Wikileaks' attack, our government will return to its Cold War ways, siloing information, reducing what it writes down, and securing itself against releases, good or bad. Mr. Assange and his conspirators tell us that they are part of a new journalism, unquote, unmotivated by profit or partisanship, never mind their past attempts to auction off their finds or the unbiased ideological spin that accompanies their leaks. But the truth is that their motivation is as old as time itself. Like small children playing with fires, fascinated with their own power to destroy, Assange and company are setting the world aflame merely to watch it burn. They are not crusaders for a better society. They are nihilists, they are anarchists, and they are enemies of the United States. I would go further than that. I would say they are enemies of humanity, and although I think many of the people in WikiLeaks are probably well-motivated, and while there may be certainly nihilists and anarchists in the milieu, my word again, the net of this whole thing is going to be basically fascist, and the beneficiaries of this will not be the forces of light, but the forces of darkness. And there'll be a full URL for the article about it's had a lot of publicity, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But WikiLeaks publishing a list of facilities which were absolutely essential to U.S. security and which it felt could not be attacked, and with the U.S. Basically maintaining its situation, and the results could ultimately prove to be utterly destructive. I want to stress again that there certainly appears to be some element of the U.S. intelligence and State Department milieu in WikiLeaks, or apparatus in WikiLeaks. I don't think, however, that it's the Obama administration. A lot of the conspiracy crowd have been saying, oh, this is an Obama State Department attempt at cracking down on Internet freedom and imposing cybersecurity. The benefits of this, beneficiaries of this are not going to be the Obama administration. However, there does appear to be an element of Western intelligence involved with this, I suspect, or of U.S. intelligence. That is what John Loftus referred to as the binary State Department and CIA, and I think the Republican faction of that binary State Department and CIA is what we're looking at here. The past broadcasts on WikiLeaks, as well as the other information that I've spoken about over the years on this program, are essential for an understanding of these broadcasts. In order to, for example, to grasp the discussion of Carl Lundstrom, the book available for download for free on my website, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, is fundamental. Please use the SpitfireList.com website. All of the information there is available for download for free. And there's also a page to click on to support the work that I'm doing. And if you don't like what you see, there's no better way of fighting back than supporting the work that I'm doing. We're just going to plunge right back in where we left off on side one. The WikiLeaks soup refers, of course, to WikiLeaks and the fact that this phenomenon is a complex one with all sorts of organizations from the right and the left and intelligence services involved in this particular bouillabaisse, so to speak, and mixing my culinary metaphors. We're going to be delving into and sort of running a spoon through the WikiLeaks soup and taking a look at some of the many elements that are involved. Again, I still have many, many unresolved questions about WikiLeaks. However, I think that some of the general primary considerations and the general vector of what it is that they're doing are beginning to become clear. We're going to plunge right in with what is the element that inspired the part of the title of this broadcast. One school of thought about WikiLeaks is that it's an Obama administration, quote, conspiracy, unquote, or intelligence operation in order to provoke a crackdown on internet freedom and promote cybersecurity. Certainly the Obama administration has been promoting cybersecurity, but I do not think that the Obama administration is the beneficiary of WikiLeaks. Far from it. WikiLeaks is going to do a lot of damage to the Obama administration and is going to hinder it, not help it. When I was young and the Vietnam War was underway, I remember seeing an article that was published in Newsweek, or perhaps Time, one of the glossy news mags of the time, and this was in early 69, maybe the spring of 1969, right after Richard Nixon had assumed office. And a Nixon administration official was quoted about the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations that were taking place, saying, "There's only one establishment at a time, and we're it," unquote. I think that applies to the Obama administration. And one of the striking things about the leaks that have come out, first of all, most of the leaks really haven't been all that remarkable. They are either things that were already known to an extent or that could be reasonably extrapolated. But, for example, most of the State Department cables that have been leaked from the Clinton or the Hillary Clinton State Department, the Obama State Department, not George W. Bush. And although many of the disclosures are anything but revelatory, having confidential diplomatic communications basically leaked, having their business put in the street, is certainly going to make it much more difficult for the U.S. to conduct foreign policy. Having set relations or an improvement in relations with Russia as a priority, the Obama administration has already seen relations with Russia frayed to an extent by the WikiLeaks disclosures. It is a very good bet that diplomacy with the Arabs is not going to be enhanced very much by having our diplomatic situation, basically our diplomatic business put in the street, so to speak. Similar with regard to China. The success of the Obama administration is going to be greatly hindered vis-a-vis foreign policy. And, for example, with regard to relations to Saudi Arabia and China, those also have profound implications for the economy as well. This is going to be very destructive to the Obama administration. And ultimately, if some of the things such as the leaking of facilities that are absolutely essential to U.S. security and which must be prevented or must be guarded against terrorist attack, and the leaking of information about the Social Security numbers of active duty American military personnel, this could ultimately result in a major terrorist incident. That would weaken the Obama administration, make them look soft on terror or incompetent. And in general, this is something that is not benefiting the Obama administration at all. And in particular, I was struck by the fact that all of the State Department leaks that I've seen appear to have been leaks basically about the Hillary Clinton-supervised Obama State Department. One of the things I wondered in connection with that was whether perhaps our discussions with John Loftus about there being basically two intelligence systems, one associated with the Democrats and one associated with the Republicans and the transnational corporations and, by extension, the underground Reich. I am wondering to what extent the Republican/Bush State Department and intelligence community may be leaking some of this information to WikiLeaks in order to destabilize the Obama administration. It now turns out that somebody who has been in Sweden, where, of course, WikiLeaks has been greatly assisted by the pirate vortex, at the center of which lies Nazi financier Carl Lundstrom, who turns out to be operating and holding forth in Sweden at this time. None other than George Bush's right-hand man, Karl Rove, the roving reporter. From, among other blogs, The Swedish Wire, we find the following. This is from the 12th of January of 2011. Karl Rove behind Sweden's hunt for Assange. Like many of the articles, this sort of has U.S. as the villain in this whole thing, and Karl Rove as part of the great Satan. I think this is a very important article, but I think one needs to read between the lines and to see Rove here not as someone that's helping to lower the hammer on Julian Assange. I think actually the attempts at reining in Assange have been very heavy-handed and have actually served as a PR black eye for the United States. Playing whack-a-mole with a guy like Assange has only turned him into a martyr. I think a much better way of neutralizing the damage that he's done is to show him for exactly what he is and show Wikileaks for what it is, too, which is a Nazi-based, at the core, multi-agency intelligence operation involving some really interesting elements, including quite possibly at some level Russian internet criminals. We're going to take a look at that later on. But again, who turns out to be holding forth in Sweden at this time? Who turns out to be very close to the current Prime Minister of Sweden, known as the Ronald Reagan of Europe? Karl Rove. From the Swedish Wire of January 12th of 2001, Karl Rove behind Sweden's hunt for Assange. Former Bush White House strategist Karl Rove may be playing a leading role in the try to prosecute WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, according to sources for several legal experts. Karl Rove was a senior advisor to former U.S. President George W. Bush. He is also advisor to Sweden's Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt. Several legal experts now suggest that Karl Rove is likely to be involved in advising the Swedish government how Julian Assange can be extradited to the U.S. via the Scandinavian country. This has Karl's signature, a reliable political source told the Huffington Post. He, Rove, must be very happy. He's right back in the middle of it, making himself valuable to his new friends, seeing the U.S. government doing just what he'd like and screwing his opponents big time, unquote. British lawyers of Assange, who has enraged the United States by leaking U.S. diplomatic cables and embarrassed world leaders, says there is a, quote, real risk that if extradited to Sweden, Assange may be sent on to the United States, where he could be detained at Guantanamo Bay or even face the death penalty. U.S. federal prosecutors seeking to build a case against the WikiLeaks leader Julian Assange for his role in a huge dissemination of classified government documents are looking for evidence of any collusion in his early contacts with an Army intelligence analyst suspected of leaking the information, according to the New York Times. Fredrik Reinfeldt has been called the Ronald Reagan of Europe, website Legal Schnauzer said. He has a friendship with Karl Rove that dates back at least 10 years to the George W. Bush campaign for president in 2000. Fredrik Reinfeldt reportedly asked Rove to help with his 2010 re-election in Sweden. According to the website Dagens Opinion, Karl Rove visited Sweden last December. So Karl Rove, apparently an advisor to the current Prime Minister of Sweden, speculating here. There is a line of speculation that he's helping to prosecute Julian Assange. Well, that may be. It may also be one of the reasons why the attempts at stifling Assange are so clumsy. But again, I think with Karl Rove's name cropping up here, just exactly what he's doing. Is he really working to prosecute Julian Assange, or is he helping to manipulate the WikiLeaks phenomenon, at the core of which, again, it's highly complex. There appear to be input from a variety of intelligence services, as we looked at in For the Record 725, Wikispooks in the world of Stig Larsson. But again, at the core of WikiLeaks is anything but a progressive organization. But basically, it's a Nazi milieu, utilizing a lot of people who are not only not aware of what's going on, but who would be ideologically opposed to that if they were. But Karl Rove, very close to the current Prime Minister of Sweden. And Karl Rove, by the way, as we've looked at in some of our discussions of him, not only someone whose political pedigree dates back to the dirty tricks that were implemented by the Nixon White House and the GOP under the elder George Bush, but Karl Rove's father was a corporate geologist for Getty Oil. And by that, I don't mean that he was going around taking core samples. He was working in the Getty corporate headquarters. J. Paul Getty was a personal friend of Adolf Hitler. He also shipped Mexican oil to the Nazis. And he is very close to the milieu of Otto von Bolschwing, the SS official whose protege Helena von Dahm helped to staff the Republican Party. There are also very strong links between the Getty milieu and some of the San Francisco political milieu grouped around Gavin Newsom. His father, Bill Newsom, was the attorney for J. Paul Getty and works very closely with Getty's son, Gordon Getty. Again, Karl Rove his father was a corporate geologist with Getty Oil. Rove himself, a very interesting individual. There are also very strong links, as we've seen in past discussions, of Eurofascism between the Swedish power elite and the forces that were allied with Nazi Germany in World War II. Many prominent Swedish industrialists and financiers, although the country was nominally neutral, supported Hitler, and many Swedes volunteered for service in the Waffen-SS. I would note, too, that again, the net thrust of the WikiLeaks disclosures is not going to help Obama, but it's going to hurt Obama. A very fascinating detail concerns the fact there's just been a revolution of sorts in Tunisia, the government of which was certainly extremely repressive. The fact that it was repressive was the focal point of some of the leaks that took place of State Department documents, and there were also some State Department documents from the Bush administration era that talked about the fellow Mohammed Ghannouchi as a very positive successor to Mr. Ben Ali. And whether or not WikiLeaks, this is the first WikiLeaks coup, it certainly is interesting. Article from The Guardian by Ian Black, Tunisia, the WikiLeaks connection. And it reads, the man now president, Mohammed Ghannouchi, was profiled in January of 2006 in a secret U.S. cable recently released by WikiLeaks. A technocrat and economist, Ghannouchi has served as prime minister since 1999. He is rumored to have told many he wishes to leave the government but has not had the opportunity. The length of his service as prime minister also suggests that Ben Ali does not view him as a threat, and he is unlikely to be viewed as a qualified successor. However, average Tunisians generally view him with respect, and he is well liked in comparison to other GOT and RCD ruling party officials. Then U.S. Ambassador William Hudson said, quote, given the fact that Ben Ali has a dictatorial hold, it is hard to believe he'll voluntarily step down, unquote. Even so, the mere fact that an increasing number of Tunisians are talking about the end of the Ben Ali era is remarkable, unquote. Publication of WikiLeaks sourced private U.S. comments on the corruption and nepotism of a hated sclerotic regime is said to have helped create Tunisia's protest and generated talk by U.S. commentators of a WikiLeaks revolution. Certainly it does not sound like the Ben Ali regime is one to have been mourned. However, it remains to be seen just exactly what happens when the pinballs stop ricocheting around the Tunisian game board, who winds up benefiting. A few articles that should be considered in connection with this. And we're going to take a look at a January 16th, 2011 article from Yahoo News about the Tunisia protest. The full URL will be in the description for the program. Listen to who turned up in Tunisia at the time of the protests, of the perhaps first WikiLeaks revolution. Police said they had caught two men with Swedish passports after one of the shooting incidents, and state television quoted a security source as saying 4 people carrying German passports had been detained in the same incident. It showed what it said were the detained foreigners with blonde hair and fair complexions being guarded by armed police, and said the arms they were carrying included automatic weapons. However, the Swedish news agency TT said the men were part of a Swedish group visiting Tunisia to hunt wild boar who had been attacked by a mob. Couple of points of information, more rumination about the dictatorial nature, the repressive nature of the Ben Ali regime, and how it should be removed, perhaps. The Bertelsmann Corporation's Transformation Index talks about how difficult Bertelsmann is, of course, the German corporation descended from the SS publisher that has taken control of English language publishing for all intents and purposes, certainly in the United States, and it is the largest single English language publisher. The Bertelsmann Transformation Index about Tunisia, considering the moderate level of difficulty in carrying out reforms and taking into account the government's ambitious development objectives, of Tunisia's decision-makers have once again advanced transformation too sluggishly. Well, too sluggishly for whom? Certainly for, among others, Elliot Abrams, writing for the Council on Foreign Relations website. Tunisia is not a very important country, but the fall of its 23-year-old dictatorship could nevertheless be significant. Day after day of demonstrations at the end of 2010 proved able for the first time to defy the security forces. President Ben Ali removed the governor of the relevant province and blamed his own ministers, and in a TV speech denounced the demonstrators, but he has no answers to the demands for freedom and prosperity. His police state control of the streets and the communication media is failing. So again, Elliot Abrams, among others, those who are noting how nice it would be if Mr. Ali left. And again, this is not to constitute an endorsement of Mr. Ben Ali. He certainly appears to be a bad one, but it remains to be seen what happens after all of the pinballs have stopped ricocheting around the Tunisian game board. Note the people with Swedish passports and German passports and weapons and blonde hair and blue eyes who appear to have been involved in some of the shooting incidents that precipitated this. Where is that at? Where were they from? Buddies of Carl Lundstrom, perhaps? Again, as is in the case with so many of the aspects of this WikiLeaks story, I have more questions and answers. I would also note in passing that in some of Julian Assange's own emails to John Young, originally one of the founders of WikiLeaks, later turned one of its most effective critics, he noted that Chinese dissidents and expatriates were among the founders of WikiLeaks, and it has, among other things, an anti-Chinese stance. I would note the following from the allafrica.com website. Among the countries that was developing a relationship with the now overthrown or replaced Tunisian government was China. On this occasion, excerpting here, on this occasion, Mr. Kamel Morjane stressed Tunisia's strong commitment, as instructed by President Ben Ali, to foster the long-standing ties of friendship between the Tunisian and Chinese peoples, intensify political consultation with China on issues of mutual interest, and strengthen the economic and trading cooperation between the two countries. So was this something of a coup for the Bush/GOP faction of the State Department? Certainly, I think this is going to tick off the Chinese, the fact that there may have been some U.S. input here. It is not going to help the Obama administration's relationship with China. That, in turn, is not going to help the Obama administration's either foreign policy or economic policy. That will ultimately, if that failure becomes manifest, that will help to put Karl Rove's friends right back in office. Now, more about who is backing WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Again, it's usually conceptualized, WikiLeaks, that is usually conceptualized as some sort of progressive, sort of lefty organization. One of the things that's led to that is the support for WikiLeaks by George Soros and Open Society. Again, Julian Assange, in his January 7th, 2007 email to John Young of Cryptome that we excerpted in For the Record 725, we also did it in 732. We're going to F them all, Chinese mostly, but not entirely a feint. Invention abounds, lies, twists, and distorts everywhere needed for protection. Hackers monitor Chinese and other intel as they burrow into their targets, and when they pull, so do we. Inexhaustible supply of material. Near 100,000 documents and emails a day. We're going to crack the world open and let it flower into something anew. If fleecing the CIA will assist us, then fleece we will. We have pullbacks from the National Endowment for Democracy, Council on Foreign Relations, Freedom House, and other CIA teats. And more from the WikiLeaks. So when other WikiLeaks founders started to, this is from John Young, operating a website to post leaked documents isn't very expensive. Young estimates he spends a little over $100 a month for Cryptome server space. So when other WikiLeaks founders started to talk about the need to raise $5 million and complained that an initial round of publicity had affected, quote, our delicate negotiations with the Open Society Institute and other funding bodies, unquote, Young says he resigned from the effort. Open Society Institute is George Soros. Now, George Soros is generally identified with the so-called progressive sector. He was certainly opposed to most of the policies of the Bush administration, or at least many of the foreign policy aspects of the Bush administration. He also was a major investor in Harken Energy. George Soros is fiercely critical of Israel, and as a result, he, in addition to being allied with the more progressive sector, also has developed some very, very interesting connections over the years with some far right-wing groups as well. Generally, he is a whipping boy of the far right in their attacks on the left. Interestingly enough, after Julian Assange came under attack, he eventually fled to the United Kingdom, and where he began holding out was something called the Frontline Club. And I'm going to have, we're running low on time, so I'm going to attenuate much of what is going to follow. But the Frontline Club is where Julian Assange has been holding forth. There's, I will have a URL talking about that. The Frontline Club is financed by George Soros. Talking about the founding of the Frontline Club, Mr. Smith set up Frontline by borrowing £3 million, or $5.7 million, against his family's estate in Norfolk, England, and has received financing for its events from the Open Society Institute, a philanthropic organization set up by the billionaire investor and philanthropist George Soros. That is where Julian Assange has been hanging out. It's one of the places he's been seeking or obtaining refuge, I should say, is the Frontline Club of George Soros. Interestingly enough, as we've talked about with George in the past discussions of George Soros, he got his start in business, or perhaps in professional life in general, aiding with the Nazi Aryanization and confiscation of Jewish property in Hungary during World War II. Interestingly enough, one of the few people who has talked about that, and he's talking about it in order to smear George Soros, in order to in turn, by extension, smear the so-called progressive sector, is none other than, as I call him, Glenn Drek, of the incendiary commentator of the Fox network. And Glenn Drek is one of the few people who has correctly, being the classic broken clock that's right twice a day, has correctly hit on George Soros' start in the business world confiscating Jewish property from the Nazis. And again, I have suggested in no uncertain terms that he is a Borman Jew. Very quickly, in an interview with Steve Kroft, and you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps. George Soros. Right, I was 14 years old, and I would say that that's when my character was made. Steve Kroft. My understanding is that when you went out with this protector of yours, you swore that you were his adopted godson. George Soros. Yes, yes. Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews. George Soros. Yes, that's right. Yes. Steve Kroft. I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult? George Soros. No, not at all, not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all. Steve Kroft. No feeling of guilt? George Soros. No. For example, I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these... For example, that I'm Jewish and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there, unquote. None of that? George Soros. Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away, but there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, in a funny way, it's just like in markets. That if I weren't there, of course, I wasn't doing it, somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. And it was the whether I was there or not. I was only a spectator. The property was being taken away, so I had no role in taking away that property, so I had no sense of guilt. Indeed, that's very revealing. I think a lot of the corporate world, I think, could be said to possess that very same type of ethic. Now, we're running low on time, so I'm going to just briefly touch on a number of different elements. In the January 2007, or in a 2007 email to John Young, among the organizations and data that he has, quote, this from an email from Assange himself, dozens of political parties and consulates, World Bank, APEC, UN sections, trade groups, Tibet and Fulon Dafa associations, and Russian fishing mafia who pull data everywhere. There is an organization, Spam House, that monitors internet malfeasance, and there is a web domain that ostensibly appears to be Wikileaks, but it actually isn't Wikileaks. It's run by an outfit called Heihachi, which Spam House thinks is a Russian and Baltic online criminal organization. And what they're talking about with the Russian fishing mafia basically are Russian-based cyber criminals who use hacking to basically get information with which to perpetrate online crime. So that appears to be among the elements that is in the mix with WikiLeaks. That is one of the elements in the WikiLeaks soup. Again, more discussion of this in the longer discussion of this in the description for the program. I would also note, again, we're running low on time, that Joran Jermos, a.k.a. Israel Shamir, the fellow traveler of the Swedish Nazi and anti-Semitic milieu to which Carl Lundstrom belongs, is also part of a conspiratorial milieu, or a conspiracy milieu, which is sympathetic to the notion that the Aryan race evolved from space aliens and they've been holding out in Antarctica, and that the space aliens and their Aryan brothers from Antarctica and the Third Reich are all going to rise up someday. One of the leaks that is attributed to WikiLeaks is a notion that the U.S. is engaged in a war with flying saucers based near Antarctica. Is that disinformation? Are they preparing us for some sort of UFO appearance? Good question. Another interesting WikiLeaks cable concerns, and again, this will be dealt with at greater length in the description to the program. We can only touch on it here due to the limitations of time. But in one of the past broadcasts dealing with miscellaneous articles and updates, we talked about an Irish Nazi who was basically neutralized down in Bolivia, who appears to have been acting as part of an international Nazi and fascist milieu, operating in conjunction with Hungarian and Romanian fascists in Europe. They were allegedly plotting to overthrow Evo Morales. Now WikiLeaks cables are suggesting that they basically quote U.S. State Department officials as attributing that to an Evo Morales government provocation to serve as a crackdown on his critics. I would note that whatever the truth of the situation, the WikiLeaks documents are exonerating the Nazis for their behavior. I would not put it past Evo Morales to hire individuals to do something like that, although he's effected some decent reforms. He's also pretty cynical, and I sure as hell wouldn't put it past U.S. intelligence and or State Department to use Nazis abroad to try to nail Evo Morales, whom they certainly hate. So go figure there. That concludes, however, that's all we have time for, so this concludes Side 2 For the Record program number 733, WikiLeaks Soup, the ROVEing reporter, subtitled A Night in Tunisia. This program is being recorded on January 16th of the year 2011. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 733, titled WikiLeaks Soup, ROVEing reporter, subtitled A Night in Tunisia. This program is being recorded on January 16th of the year 2011. This program is going to wrap up, I hope, the series of broadcasts or a sequence of broadcasts that I have been doing about WikiLeaks. I want to stress that this is a remarkable phenomenon. It is not, repeat, this is not a good thing. It's remarkable to me to see people from, sort of mainstream, quote, progressive icons, such as Daniel Ellsberg and Michael Moore and others, flocking unqualifiedly to the feet of Julian Assange and elevating him to the position of a political martyr. the anonymous milieu, who's, of course, they're anonymous, so there may well be some hardcore Nazis and fascists in there. But on the balance, it would appear to be anything but. My guess is most of the political and ideological orientation of those individuals would be sort of described as anarcho-utopian, to coin a term. If we just remove all of the limits and barriers to human understanding and freedom, then humanity will blossom anew or afresh or something. That, in my opinion, is not the case. But the irony is that at the core of WikiLeaks appears to be anything but what Michael Moore or Daniel Ellsberg or the anonymous people or anything else would like. First of all, at the core of the pirate vortex, as I called it, not only anonymous, but Pirate Bay, the associated pirate parties and various elements, is not only a prominent Nazi financier, Carl Lundstrom, who appears to be part of the what I call the Underground Reich, the Nazi International, and the Old Bormann Capital Network, or the capital network that evolved from the Old Bormann Flight Capital program. And at the core of that, as well as the Pirate Bay people, Pirate Bay being a file-sharing site in which files are pirated somewhat. And at the core of that, and again, the people using Pirate Bay would see themselves as anti-corporate and anti-profit, so to speak. And yet at the very core of that appears to be some corporate entities that are looking to use the BitTorrent protocol or platform as a corporate vehicle and services that appear to be involved in this. My feeling is this is a highly complex event. I still have a lot of questions about it. I think that the analyses that have been offered up are simplistic and inadequate, although many of them are at least partially accurate. I'm going to attempt, note my choice of words, I'm going to attempt to briefly do justice to some of those arguments and address those, in particular the notion that WikiLeaks is an Obama administration clandestine operation in order to clamp down on internet freedom and cyber security. Cybersecurity is certainly a priority of the Obama administration, but I think the available evidence points to rather the Bush-Rove GOP/Underground Reich-linked element of our State Department and intelligence services rather than those linked with the Democrats and Obama. But again, this is highly complex. It's an event hitherto unprecedented, and I want to strongly caution people against simplistic analyses because indeed WikiLeaks soup is not a bad metaphor. This is a goulash of sorts. There are all kinds of ingredients in this. And so we're going to stir this up, and we're going to do a little tasting, and we're going to see just what exactly is in here. One of the things that I noted last week is that one goal for making a whole lot of money off of file sharing in the future, and indeed Pirate Bay itself, in addition to its Nazi/financier connections, is housed within an offshore corporate entity called Reservella, which is very, very mysterious indeed and incorporated in the Seychelles Islands. The part of the title of this ROVEing reporter is a reference to Karl Rove. That's right, Karl Rove, Bush's right-hand man. And he is very much into the Swedish political mix, and there are indications that he is involved with the WikiLeaks situation. My feeling is that the articles that have mentioned this and the blog posts that have mentioned this have missed some of the logical implications of this. However, Karl Rove's presence in Sweden at this time is more than a little interesting. Along the lines of what we were talking about last week, and in addition, of course, to the presence of Carl Lundstrom at the apex of what I call the pirate vortex or pirate milieu, we find that WikiLeaks' Scandinavian operations are basically under the supervision of a guy named Joran Jermas, a.k.a. Israel Shamir, who was part and parcel to a Swedish Nazi and anti-Semitic milieu. Furthermore, his son, a fellow named Wallstrom, is part and parcel to that same kind of ideological orientation, and he has been in charge of WikiLeaks cable operations in Russia. As I noted last week, that has to be one of two situations. Either the link between Carl Lundstrom, who patronizes the Nordic Publishers House, and people of the Swedish Nazi/anti-Semitic milieu like Joran Jermas, a.k.a. Israel Shamir and Son, who also are part of a political environment that overlaps the Nordic House milieu. Either that's a coincidence or there is a relationship between those two. I don't think that that is a coincidence. And as we cruise further into the WikiLeaks environment, as we begin to stir up and sample the WikiLeaks soup, so to speak, and see just what exactly are the ingredients that have gone into this soup, we're going to be taking a look at the fact that, obviously, as we've seen in For the Record 725, there are intelligence services involved here. Last week, in For the Record 732, I described WikiLeaks as sort of the intelligence services equivalent of a WWF cage match. There are a lot of intelligence